The question is, do you agree that Scotland should be an independent country?
For me, the principle that we work best when we work together, without coercion or conscription, bullying or bossiness.
Always whenever someone says, oh, peace and sausage, and it's a roll and sausage, and it's sausage roll, we're better together.
Well, they didn't. It was us. We invented it, just like every other bloody thing.
Well, that's very interesting.
We have a very serious the referendum. It seems to me that they're not dealing with the issues.
Hi, if you've been fed up with most of the debate until now, the Scottish Independence Podcast is your chance to hear some different views on what the independence referendum means for Scotland. Hello, this is Scottish Independence Podcast number 9, and for this one on Sunday I spoke to Carolyn Leckie, who is a former MSP for the Scottish Socialist Party and also now a member of the Women For Indy group. And we spoke about the Women For Indy group and its origins and its aims and what they're hoping to achieve with it. We also spent a bit of time on her experiences in the Parliament, so we'll just go straight to the interview and I'll have a wee word with you at the end. Carolyn Leckie, you're working for the Women for Independence campaign, the organisation. Would you like to tell me something about it? How did it start? What were the origins of it?
Oh, the origins of it were really women just talking to each other and sort of individually and collectively at the same time. I suppose getting annoyed at the coverage of the independence debate in the media, particularly. It was invariably men in grey suits who were being asked to comment on the debate. And given that women are 52% of the population, and given that there is currently a gender gap in terms of support for independence, I think there was a few of us who were starting to think that strategically it was wrong to exclude women from the discussion. And I think, certainly from my own perspective, I've been frustrated in the past in terms of party politics, having to communicate your politics via a party political vehicle which invariably has its own barriers, particularly in relation to gender. So I originally spoke via Twitter with Kate Higgins, and I spoke to other women like Rosie Kane. Kate Higgins spoke to other women. It was a really very organic process. We had dinner, we called a meeting, we invited women along. At that stage it wasn't open, and part of that reasoning was that we didn't want it to automatically become something that attracted organised political groupings either. You know, we really wanted to appeal to women who were similarly minded in terms of the need for it.
So, independence, if you like.
Yeah, independence, I suppose, yeah. And also the common thing was that we wanted to do things differently, and not conduct discussions in the same way, kind of Yaboo style politics, and really listen. And that's where our founding principles came from, and our emphasis on listening first. That we don't think that it's likely to achieve a conversion in support for independence amongst women, or, you know, most women are actually undecided, for the debate to just carry on in the way that it was carrying on. We thought that there was a gap, and that we could fill that gap, and our autonomy was really, really important as well.
Okay, and you talked about, and I've read some articles about this kind of listening exercise you're doing. So how does that work, and how's it going?
Well, we've just launched our online survey today. It's going to work in a number of different ways, but we've launched our online version, which is where we're encouraging women who haven't made their minds up yet, or who say that they're going to vote no, to fill that survey in, so that we can get a picture of what women are thinking and why they're thinking the way that they're thinking. That obviously requires them to volunteer to do that, so we're hoping that they will. At the same time, we're hoping that, and our numbers have grown, that we will be able to build a really grassroots network across Scotland, where women will be talking to women they know in their communities, workplaces, organisations, groups, wherever they meet other women, and organise listening exercises, and not approach it from the point of view immediately of trying to persuade or campaign or beat anybody over the head with support for independence, but really try and identify what are the concerns, what are the questions, what is it going to take to persuade that quite significant group of women who haven't made their minds up to support independence. Was going to persuade them to vote yes in 2014 and really, really listen. So that'll be a challenge for me and a lot of other women who maybe have been involved in party politics, particularly before, because we'll have to sit in a room and listen to women. We've got some questions. There's a toolkit on our website which we are encouraging women everywhere to just use for themselves and listen to what women are saying without getting involved in a debate.
And what kind of responses have you been getting? What have people been saying?
I think that there's been an appetite for it immediately. You know, as soon as it started off as just a few women talking to each other, and then when I started speaking to more women about it, and when other women started speaking to more women about it, it was just like, of course you need to do that. You know, so there wasn't any need really to explain why. It was just like, great, glad somebody's doing it, because I think that there's a widespread dissatisfaction amongst women, not just in terms of the independence debate, but with politics in general, about not being heard, not being included, not being involved, and wanting to create their own space and being determined to be heard and be listened to without having to ask for permission via most of the male-dominated organisations, whether that's political parties or the media, particularly the TV media.
Yeah, well, I was thinking you were the former MSP, so do you think, part of this, disappointment is that when the Scottish Parliament came in, it was a kind of missed opportunity to have a 50-50 Parliament. Do you think that, how did you feel about that?
I think still male-dominated. I can only really speak for myself personally in that the Scottish Parliament hasn't reached 50-50. In fact, it's had a wee bit of a retrograde step, and in fact the SNP are particularly bad in terms of women's representation amongst MSPs. The Labour Party did it as a one-term option, and even though the Scottish Socialist Party had 50-50, that was after quite a bitter internal battle to achieve that. Where there were men in positions where they had a wee bit of a vested interest who were very unhappy, and the legacy of that, I'm afraid, still persists to this day, and where women were characterised as, things like no shrinking violets and all that sort of stuff, and there was bitterness left over from that debate. So whilst the 50-50 debate ensured that we actually had 4 women MSPs out of 6 MSPs, the way the mechanism worked, it didn't remove all the other barriers. It didn't remove sexism. It didn't remove some of the characterisation of women that's very, very stereotypical, particularly when they challenge powerful men. So there's a huge cultural change still to be achieved across the world, apart from anything else. But my point being is that even if there were 50-50 representation in the Scottish Parliament, and even when there is a woman in a powerful position, whether that might be Nicola Sturgeon or Joanne Lamont as a leader of a political party, or Julia Gillard in Australia, it doesn't obliterate sexism. Far from it. Sometimes it acts as a beacon for sexism, because how dare women actually get into these positions, and it doesn't matter whether I disagree with a lot of the politics of women in powerful positions. They still experience sexism. Margaret Thatcher still experienced sexism,
All right, this is a broader question, a bit more difficult, but how do you think independence could help to solve some of these problems on a more local level, even though you're saying it is a global problem, but how do you think independence could help this situation in Scotland?
Well, fundamentally for me, independence is about democracy and the right to make the choices and have the ability, when you make those choices, for them to be implemented. And I think historically what's been shown is that how people vote in Scotland, it's not reflected in the government they get in Westminster that holds control over all the really important things that everybody, including women, are concerned about, particularly fertility rights, for example. So I don't think it's a guarantee that independence will make things better for women, but the women who are involved for Women for Independence agree that we want independence to be better for women, and we'll also be creating a space where women will be able to discuss what do we mean by better, and that might be a lot of different things to a lot of different women, but we want to be able to talk about that. I mean, there will. I'll have views about wanting 50-50 representation, for example, written into a written constitution. I think there's quite a lot of women who I know who want that, but it might not necessarily be the case. So I wouldn't want to preempt what other women think about what would be better for women.
Yeah.
And obviously control of tax and spending and benefits and public services and all the big decisions that actually would give you the power to make really quite radical change in terms of all these things. We can only have through independence, because I do think that it's very, very unlikely that the kind of Scotland that I want to live in is going to be delivered by a Westminster government.
Okay. To come back to the thing about the gender gap in support for independence, I've got the graph in front of me here, and it actually says opposed to independence is actually quite similar, 53%, 56% for women. Support is the one where it's different, 39% men, 22% for women. However, the don't know for women figure is actually much bigger. So men were like 8% and women 23%. Why do you think that there is such a huge gender difference?
I think that's why we're listening. You know, we don't really know. I mean, I think that illustrates the point of that women's views aren't really prioritised, you know. I'm not aware of anybody apart from Women for Independence trying to actually ask that question. So we'll find out. I think that women might be a bit more circumspect about independence. I would only be speculating based on kind of anecdotal evidence of what women in my work say, for example. I think it's a lot of different things. Some of the things I've heard so far are about a concern really for women in England and working class people in England. That's the thing, that kind of quite traditional left argument about, you know, we've made in common with people in Newcastle, Liverpool, Manchester. That
I think it's becoming known now in the modern terms as the Stuart Lee argument, because of his famous article about it, that comedian. So I think people are. The last few times I've seen that come up, people just call it the Stuart Lee argument now.
And I think that it's interesting that it's a view and it needs to be listened to and needs to be. And you know, it needs to be respected. I personally don't agree with that view. I do think that Scottish independence will be a progressive step forward in terms of the whole of the United Kingdom, and I would hope stimulate a bit of progressive change and give confidence to movements that are more kind of traditional in the north of England as opposed to the southeast of England, and that whole idea of autonomy and democracy and proper democracy and participation of the people and everything. I hope that it would give a wee bit of encouragement to that. But at the end of the day, we are culturally, historically and everything a nation, and I'm very clear that the people who should decide that are the people who live in Scotland. I don't think it's anything to do with ethnicity or anything like that. But we are a political entity, a political group with a whole host of reasons why we are that entity, and we have the right as that entity to determine our own future. And, you know, like that argument could be applied to a United States of Europe, for example, or a United States of the world. You know, if you apply that argument, you could apply it across the whole world. And I am an internationalist, but I think there's also a strategic question about how do you get there? How do you get that sense of power? People need to able to be aware of their own power and have confidence that they can actually use their own power and affect change for there to be any hope of wider change on an international level. And if people feel completely disenfranchised and disempowered, and it doesn't matter how they vote, they never ever get the government that they vote for, it's not exactly going to stimulate worldwide revolution, is it?
No, and it's like the very old idea about not even the strongest arm can throw as far as London, is the famous old quote. So that kind of disenfranchisement coming from everything being removed to Westminster. No, obviously. You can guess that I probably agree with you.
Yeah. I'm very much, I'm really interested in, I've been involved, I don't know if you've been following the Electoral Reform Society stuff, the People's Gathering, where they've been looking at stimulating democracy in the context of Scotland's constitutional future. They're not taking a position in independence,